why is it important for us to learn about acute rheumatic fever? When it comes to acute rheumatic fever, I always say, carditis is a very important feature, right? But when it comes to carditis, this group A streptococcal infection is going to result in valve injury. Which valve does acute rheumatic fever hate the most? The mitral valve. It hates the mitral valve with a full-blown passion. Okay, this is your left atrium, this is your left ventricle, this is your right atrium, and this is your right ventricle. And so here between your left atrium and left ventricle is where you got your mitral valve. Okay, so whenever you have acute rheumatic fever, you're going to end up getting mitral stenosis. So whenever somebody's got mitral stenosis, one of the most important causes is going to be rheumatic heart disease. So when you have rheumatic heart disease, your important pathology you're going to develop is mitral stenosis. But what else can give you mitral stenosis? Is it only rheumatic heart disease? Not everybody gets rheumatic heart disease, right? And most of the time, remember, group A streptococcal infection are more prone to happen in developing nations. Not in the US, mostly Asia. That's where you're going to see people with group A streptococcal infection. People in poverty and stuff who have no access to medications and treatment because they don't get the appropriate treatment and end up getting undiagnosed, and therefore they end up with acute rheumatic fever. So when it comes to mitral stenosis, rheumatic heart disease 1, you have something known as a parachute mitral valve. What a parachute mitral valve is, you typically have papillary muscles and you have chordae tendineae, which is supposed to hold the cusp together. They are deformed congenitally such that they look like a parachute, which essentially will lead to something known as mitral stenosis. Okay? Then apart from that, just simple calcification, just like your aorta gets calcified, your coronaries get calcified, your valves also get calcified. Okay? So atherosclerosis is the same process, calcification is going to happen. And as a result, you'll end up with mitral stenosis. So these are your 3 most important causes. So let's ask this. So if somebody's got a mitral stenosis, okay, this area is going to become narrow. The more narrow it becomes, your blood is not going to be able to flow from your left atrium to left ventricle, right? So what's going to happen as a result? Your left atrium is going to become bigger, right? Your left atrium is going to become bigger, right? Why? Because you have an increased volume there and increased pressure there, right? So you will end up getting left atrial dilation because of volume as well as pressure overload, right? But you're having less blood flow coming to the ventricle, right? So your ventricle is going to have less blood coming here, and as a result, you'll have less cardiac output. But your ventricle is typically going to be preserved. Most of the time, initially, your left ventricle is going to be preserved in these patients, right? So you will have a low cardiac output state in a patient with mitral stenosis. Why? Because you're not letting the blood come to the ventricle, so you're not going to push it out. Right? So from a symptomatology standpoint, if you have less cardiac output, what's going to happen? You'll feel tired, right? So decreased cardiac output will lead to increased fatigue. Okay? That's what's going to happen. And apart from that, you're going to have a left atrial dilation. Now, if I draw, this is your lungs, right? The lungs brings blood back to your left atrium via pulmonary veins. Right? And this is your right ventricle that supplies blood to your lungs, and this is your IVC and superior vena cava. So remember, if something is not flowing forward, everything is going to backtrack and cause problems. The reason I want you to understand this is you don't have to ever memorize a symptom or a sign ever. So if you're not going to go this way, you're going to end up with what? Pulmonary edema and pulmonary congestion. Right? If you trace this all the way this way, what's it going to do to this? It's going to cause pulmonary hypertension. Right? Because the pressure is too high, and as a result you'll end up with pulmonary hypertension. Right? And then what would happen here? You would get right ventricular hypertrophy and eventually right heart failure. Right? It's pretty straightforward. Once you think mitral valve is stenosed, all these problems are going to happen. So from a symptom standpoint, decreased cardiac output equates to fatigue. If your mitral valve is not pressing here, you're going to have a left atrial enlargement. If you have a left atrial enlargement, what is that going to lead to? what is it going to squeeze on? It's going to squeeze on the esophagus, right? Your esophagus is right behind, and if it squeezes on that, you'll end up getting dysphagia. Now, what runs between your trachea and esophagus? Recurrent laryngeal nerve, right? As a result, if you affect the recurrent laryngeal nerve, you'll end up with hoarseness. Okay? And what is another important symptom they love to tell us when it comes to mitral stenosis? Because these are unique symptoms for a heart problem. Who gets dysphagia from a heart problem, right? Mitral stenosis does. Who gets hoarse voice from a heart problem? Mitral stenosis does. What is another unique symptom? They'll say patients come with hemoptysis. When they say hemoptysis, you think about a lung problem. But mitral stenosis can also give you hemoptysis. Why? Mitral stenosis. Now, when it comes to mitral stenosis, if you stretch this left atrium too much, is that a good thing? It's never good to stretch your left atrium. Why? The cardiologists don't like that stuff. Because if you increase the stretching, you're going to end up with abnormal firing from different places we call as atrial fibrillation. So most patients, at least 50% of patients with mitral stenosis will end up getting atrial fibrillation. Okay? Apart from atrial fibrillation, what else can happen? Again, atrial fibrillation can also directly lead to this complication, but just the presence of a left atrial enlargement and blood sitting there, even in the absence of AFib, what can happen? What happens to blood when it sits? Clots. So you can actually form a clot with or without the AFib. So just the presence of a left atrial enlargement, you should immediately think atrial fibrillation and left atrial thrombus. Period. Got it? Okay. So that's your symptomatology that you need to know. Now when it comes to physical exam findings for mitral stenosis, right? What are you going to see? You're going to do a physical exam. What is unique on a physical exam standpoint when it comes to mitral stenosis? So, yes, the murmur becomes very important, right? The murmur you're going to get, if this is your S1, this is your S2, and this is S1. Between S1 and S2 is called systole, right? Whereas between S2 and S1 is diastole, right? Typically your mitral valve is open during diastole, right? Because your blood fills from the atrium to the ventricle during diastole, right? So typically what happens is you will have a mid-diastolic murmur, right? Why do you get murmur? When you have blood flow, through a stenotic valve, you get turbulence, right? When there's flow across such stenotic valve, you get turbulence. So whenever there's blood flow through the valve is when you should hear the murmur. So blood flow during diastole, right? And during the mid part of the diastole is when the maximal pressure is happening, and that's why you're going to hear the murmur at that time, right? Just to address maneuvers directly for this valve, okay? So when it comes to mitral stenosis, the maneuvers we need to know about is a few things. You need to know what happens on inspiration, what happens to it on expiration, what happens to it on increased preload, what happens to it on decreased preload, what happens to it on increased afterload, and lastly decreased afterload. It's pretty easy. Okay, but these are the questions they're going to give you in the STEM, right? You already know. You're going to read the STEM and they're going to tell you the same things. The rules are very simple. All left-sided murmurs will increase in intensity on what? Inspiration. L-E-F-T. E for expiration. All left-sided murmurs increase in intensity on expiration. Why? Let's do inspiration first. If I inspire, is inspiration an active process or a passive process? When somebody's living, you say you're inspired, right? When somebody dies, what do you say? Expired. So what is active? Inspire, right? So when you inspire, what's the first step in inspiration? You have to be active. So contract your diaphragm. When you contract your diaphragm, what happens? If this is your lungs, if this is your diaphragm contracts and moves downwards. That's step number one. Once you do that, as you move that, what's going to happen? You're going to increase your thoracic cavity space, right? So if you increase your thoracic cavity space, what's going to happen? You normally have a parietal pleura attached to the thoracic cage, and you also have a visceral pleura attached to your lung. In between that space, what do you have? Pleural space. Now the pleural space typically maintains a negative pressure. It typically lives about -5. Now when you contract this diaphragm and pull downwards, you increase volume. How is volume related to pressure? It's inverse. If volume goes up, pressure goes down. So if the volume is increasing, your pressure is going to go from -5 to -8. So you make a much more stronger negative suction force. When you make a negative suction force, your alveoli typically ranges between -1, 0 and +1. Typically by the end of expiration, you'll always be at 0. Okay? So once you have this negative force now, from 0, the alveolus is collapsed, you pull it open. If you pull open a closed alveolus, you're increasing volume. If you increase volume, what happens to pressure? It goes down. So your pressure will become -1, right? Now, what is atmospheric pressure? It is positive. As a result, air is going to come in, and that's how you breathe. So if you think about the same analogy, when you inspire, you're creating this negative suction force to suck in air. Would you also suck in blood? You will, from your legs and your head through your IVC, superior vena cava, to where? To the right side of the heart. And it'll go through right ventricle into the lung, and it'll keep it in the lung. Why? Because that's where the negative suction force is. So less blood would go to the left side of the heart during inspiration. The whole travel pathway is through the right side to the lung. Make sense? So similarly, when you say expiration, the opposite should happen. You let go of the diaphragmatic pull, everything compresses, and you push everything out. Right? So on expiration, you increase blood flow through the left side of the heart. So in a mitral stenosis, when you do expiration, you have increased blood flow. Right? Increased flow equals to increased murmur. Got it? So when you do expiration in mitral stenosis, your murmur should go up. Got it? What about inspiration? You have less blood flow coming to the left side, right? On inspiration, and therefore your murmur should go down. Got it? Pretty straightforward. Inspiration, expiration. If you really don't want to spend time understanding it, LE. E is for expiration on left. RI. I is for inspiration. I'd still say understand it, don't memorize, but in case during exam time you're like, I don't get it. You don't remember the story, just go with it, okay? Preload is essentially venous return. If you ever increase preload on the left side, right? If you ever increase preload, then your murmur should get louder because you're having increased blood flow through it. How do you increase preload? What maneuvers would you do? Huh? Yoga. Whenever you do squatting and leg raising. Okay, so if I'll say yoga, squatting and leg raising equates to increased preload. When you do squatting and leg raising, you increase preload, you'll increase the flow across your mitral valve, and as a result, your murmur should go up. Whereas if you decrease preload, less blood flow on the left side through the valve, and as a result, less murmur. How do you decrease your preload? Superman. How does Superman do in movies? Stands like this, right? He stands upright, blows his chest up, basically doing a Valsalva maneuver, you know, like he's constipated, but still, right? When you see Superman standing and Valsalva maneuver, is gonna decrease your preload. So Superman is the way to remember what your afterload is gonna decrease. So how are you gonna decrease your preload? So if you decrease your preload, your murmur should go down. Yes? Now let's talk about afterload. When it comes to afterload, you ask yourself a very simple question. Okay? Can I wipe this part because I need more space on the board? I can, right? Okay. So now you get a history, you know exactly what's going on with your patient because you've understood what's wrong with mitral stenosis from a standpoint of what to expect in history as well as your patient's physical exam. Now you have to come to diagnose the patient, right? When it comes to diagnose, if you got an EKG on a patient with mitral stenosis, what would you see, which is going to be very unique? Surgical valve replacement is for the patient, the same indication, but if it is not pliable, then you go for surgical valve replacement in those patients. Another indication to do surgical valve replacement is if the patient's got severe mitral stenosis, okay, but not symptomatic and no elevated pulmonary arterial pressure. Or what if they want to undergo cabbage, right? What if they're going to have some other aortic surgery, right? If somebody's going to undergo an open surgery for whatever reason, such as cabbage or some other valve replacement, then you can do this and replace the valve as well. Another important thing to address in a patient with mitral stenosis is